Right now, you are the most dangerous animal on the planet. Not you personally. The person holding this phone is probably completely harmless. But to every wild creature on Earth, your outline is the outline of a predator. A two-legged shadow that doesn't move like prey, or smell like prey, or sound like prey. Inside every bird and every deer and every fox, an ancient calculation is running. And the second you appear, it spits out the same short command. Run from the tall thing that walks on two legs. And yet sometimes, in the worst hour of its life, one of those creatures does the unthinkable. It walks straight toward you. In the spring of 2016, a goose in Cincinnati walked up to a police cruiser and started tapping on the door with its beak. It kept tapping until Sergeant James Givens finally got out. Then the goose backed off a few steps. It looked back. It walked a little farther and looked back again. It was checking whether he was following. And it led those officers straight to its gosling, tangled up in the string of a balloon. Sit with how strange that is. An animal whose entire body is built to keep distance between itself and something like you chose to close that distance. On purpose. It walked toward the most dangerous creature in the area instead of running from it. To understand how an animal can break its single most important rule, you first have to see how strong that rule really is. For almost any wild animal, the smartest thing to do around a human is disappear. Two ecologists named Alejandro Frid and Lawrence Dill explained why that caution runs so deep. From the animal's point of view, a human walking toward it does not get filed under person. It gets filed under predator, the same drawer as a hunting wolf. The animal isn't studying your intentions. It isn't wondering whether you're kind. It's solving one fast, brutal equation. What costs more, running or staying? And that equation is only allowed to be wrong in one direction. Run from something harmless and you lose a little energy. Trust something dangerous and you lose everything. So evolution kept tuning animals toward fear. Better to bolt at nothing 1,000 times than to miss the one time it mattered. You work exactly the same way. A sound behind you on a dark street makes your heart jump long before you know if anything is there. And this fear runs so deep that it shows up in animals that have never seen a human in their lives. It was built over millions of years, back when a human walking toward you almost always meant death. Now every new animal inherits it fully loaded before it ever meets us. So if running is the rule, and the rule was forged over millions of years, then what has to break inside an animal for it to walk toward a human instead? You can run from a predator. That's what running is for. But you can't run from a string wrapped around your chick. You can't run from a net that pulls tighter every time you struggle. You can't run from your own head stuck inside a jar. You can't run from a calf at the bottom of a pit it can't climb out of. When the old answer stops working, the animal ends up somewhere strange. The instinct to flee is screaming, and there is nothing to flee from. And in that dead end, walking toward the danger becomes the only strategy that hasn't failed yet. And in those minutes, the body is in hell. The moment a wild animal loses the ability to move, cortisol floods its blood, and adrenaline climbs to levels that would kill it if they lasted. Researchers measuring stress hormones in deer published a finding in the European Journal of Wildlife Research that is almost impossible to believe. Deer caught in fencing had more cortisol in their blood than deer that had been shot. Getting tangled was worse than getting shot. And at the very peak of that terror, an animal will sometimes go limp and stop fighting, like it's giving up. From the outside, that stillness looks like trust. It was December 11th, 2005. About 18 miles off San Francisco near the Farallon Islands, fishermen found a humpback whale wrapped in crab trap lines. Something like 20 ropes were cutting into her mouth and her fins and her tail and dragging her down. A diver named James Mosquito and 3 others got in the water with knives. They knew that one reflexive twitch from a 50-ton tail would kill any of them instantly. She went still the moment they came close, and she held that stillness for almost an hour while strangers cut ropes off her body. When the last line fell away, she didn't disappear into the deep. She circled the divers slowly. She came up to each one and nudged him gently with her jaw before she swam off. And here is where a cold, simple explanation walks in, and we can't just step around it. Maybe the whale didn't understand anything. Maybe she was simply exhausted, and that stillness wasn't trust at all. Maybe it was the shutdown of a cornered animal with nothing left to fight with. It's a fair argument, and for a lot of these stories it fits. That koala in South Australia climbed onto a cyclist bike in 104-degree heat and drank from their water bottle. She wasn't declaring humans her friends. She was out of road, and thirst beat fear. 4 deer, exhausted in the freezing water off Alaska, swam to a boat because they were drowning, and that hull was the only solid thing in the world. Even the whale's rescuers refused to read more into it than was there. The man who organized that rescue said it plainly. You don't want to put human feelings on an animal, and nobody really knows what was going through her mind. If the whole story were just exhaustion and desperation, we could stop right here. But there's one thing exhaustion can't explain. To a lot of wild animals, you aren't some faceless human. You're a specific face, and they remember it. Crows prove this best. John Marsleff is a biologist at the University of Washington. He trapped crows while wearing the same rubber mask and then simply walked around campus in that mask, doing nothing else at all. The birds remembered the face, and every time it showed up, they screamed at it. The grudge lasted for years. They still recognized that mask 5 years later. On one of those walks, 47 of the 53 crows he passed scolded him, even though he had only ever trapped a handful of them. The birds he caught had somehow passed the word along. Your file was circulating through the neighborhood and getting updated without you having anything to do with it. And crows aren't alone. Urban mockingbirds in Florida learned to recognize one specific person who had come near their nest twice for about 30 seconds. After that, they went after that one person and ignored the thousands of students who walked past every single day. Capuchin monkeys in Kazuo Fujita's lab in Kyoto took it even further. They watched a stranger be rude to another human, not to them, to someone else entirely, and afterward they refused to take food from that person. They were judging your character by how you treat people who have nothing to do with them, which means an animal walking toward you in a crisis may not be walking toward some generic human. It may be walking toward a creature it has already made up its mind about. But even that is still one animal and one lifetime of experience. There's one last case that doesn't fit exhaustion and doesn't fit one bird's memory, and it turns the whole picture upside down. Every animal so far walked toward a human because it was cornered. The honey guide walks toward us fed and healthy and perfectly calm with nothing wrong at all. It's a small bird from Africa south of the Sahara, and it's obsessed with beeswax and bee larvae. The problem is that it can't break into a hive. Thousands of stingers make sure of that. But a human can, with fire and smoke and tools. And humans have the opposite problem. We're terrible at finding hives hidden deep inside trees across miles of bush. So the bird and the human each bring half the solution. The honey guide finds the hive and flies to a person and calls loudly and stubbornly and leads that person to the nest, hopping tree to tree until they get there. The human takes the honey. The wax and the larvae are the part the bird wants and could never reach on its own, and they get left behind for it. In 2016, a scientist named Claire Spottiswoode tested this in Mozambique with a real experiment and published it in the journal Science. The local honey hunters have a specific call. It sounds like brrr, and it's passed down from father to son for generations. When researchers played that call mixed in with other sounds at the same volume, it nearly doubled the odds that a bird would guide them, from 33% up to 66%. And the odds of actually finding a hive climbed from 17% all the way to 54%. The bird picks one specific human signal out of every other sound in the savanna, and it understands what that signal means. This person is calling me to hunt, and it's worth answering. Nobody tamed the honey guide. Nobody trained it with treats. A Portuguese missionary wrote about this partnership back in 1588. Over hundreds of thousands of years, natural selection built into an entire wild species, the willingness to go looking for the most dangerous predator on the planet, because that partnership paid off over and over again. So come back to where we started. You're still that two-legged shadow. Every wild creature on Earth learns to run from you before it learns almost anything else. That hasn't changed. But right alongside it lives another truth. An entire species spent hundreds of thousands of years arriving at the conclusion that you are also the thing that takes the danger away. A crow remembers your face for years. A whale turns around to look you in the eye. A bird calls you to a tree. They don't know what a human is, but they can recognize what help looks like no matter what body it arrives in. And every time you brake for an animal on the road, or carry a turtle across the highway, or cut a fishing line off something that can't cut it off itself, you're adding a line to a record older than your species. A record kept by creatures who have been watching us far more closely than we have ever watched them. You are the most dangerous animal that has ever lived. And still, against everything evolution ever taught them, a wild creature sometimes turns and walks toward you. Nature doesn't hand out trust like that to anyone, and it's got your name on it.